Well, hey guys, welcome back. Week 2. Hope you enjoyed the first couple chapters. Like I said, we're going to start building on that. We're not going to get to explicit Christianity yet, if you've noticed, but we're working our way there. So last week in the first couple chapters, we talked about two foundational ideas in that there is a universal morality, there is a understanding of right and wrong that we all have, and the second truth is that none of us are perfect and we don't keep this law, and that causes issues. But why does that matter? Why does it matter that we're not perfect? Why does that need to be addressed? Well, it's a great question. Lewis writes, the very idea of something being imperfect, of its not being what it ought to be, has certain consequences. So what he means by that is that, in nature there could be a stone that's not a certain shape, so it's not very useful for a building or something like that. A tree might be not quite big enough to provide the amount of shade that you're wanting out in the summertime. But those things just are what they are. That's not right or wrong. It's just are what they are. But he says, men behave a certain way, but that's not the whole story. For all the time you know that they ought to behave differently. So this is not just an idea of inconvenience. This is an idea of a man who is acting one way when he knows, and I know, he ought to be acting another way. And we treat people differently based on this. Lewis gives the example, a man who sits in his seat and he stands up and another man takes it while he's not looking. That's not necessarily okay if he intentionally steals it while he knows that. But if somebody does it by accident, we don't necessarily hold that against the person because his behavior was different than the first guy who was trying to steal the seat. That doesn't mean that bad behavior can't be useful. This is not a matter of usefulness like the tree or the stone. Remember that Lewis is writing during World War II, so he gives the example of a traitor from the other side. The traitor is useful, but all the time we know that what he's doing is wrong. Doesn't mean we don't take advantage of it. So again, we're not hitting on useful or not useful. We're hitting on right or wrong. They are different. So the question is why? It's perfectly true that we ought to behave morally, but why should we do so? If good behavior can be useful or not, or bad behavior can be useful or not, what is the bigger reasoning behind it? And that's where he gets to in the chapter that he calls What Lies Behind the Law, which is where we're trying to get to now. So for all of human history, men have been trying to discover the meaning of the universe, why we're here, what is this all about? Well, there's two main answers that are usually given. The first answer is that the universe has existed, it's always existed, or there was a big bang or something and it came into existence, and we don't really know why. There's not really a reason. That's just, kind of the way things happen. It's the hand we were dealt, so to say. And it just happened to happen that there were creatures in this universe that are able to think and to reason and to ask this sort of question. But then there's the second view, which is the view that will ultimately lead to Christianity. We're not there yet, but it says that the universe was created by something or someone, that the universe has a cause and a reasoning behind it. Lewis says, what is behind the universe is more like a mind than anything else we know. And that would explain why we have a mind, why we are able to think and reason, but because the something or someone that has created this universe is able to think and to reason. This means that it has consciousness and purpose, and it prefers one thing to another, which is where we would get our idea of right and wrong. It has purposes that we cannot grasp because it's outside of how we exist. It's bigger than that because it's brought it into existence. And one of those things we can grasp, though, is that it has a desire to produce creatures like itself. And as we look inwardly towards ourselves in our ability to think and to reason and to feel. Which view is true cannot be discovered by science between these two. You can have, which is interesting because the first view that we're just here and there's no reason, a lot of scientists seem to hold that worldview, that there's really no purpose. This is just the way that the physical universe has chosen to function. But science observers can't discover this. The question about why the universe is here can't be discovered through the scientific method because it can only observe what is here. There's no way for physical matter to give a reason for its existence. If there is something behind the universe, it cannot be simply revealed by facts. It has to reveal itself, as Lewis would say. It has to choose to reveal itself. And as Christians, we believe that God has done that. John 1:14, that says the Word became flesh and it dwelt among us. And that is what we believe. There's a moral law inside of man. That's one thing that should arouse our suspicion that there is something behind it. So we've been talking about this idea of right and wrong. Now we shouldn't just accept it for what it is. We should use that as a primary indicator that there is something outside of ourselves. If there's a law outside of ourselves, there must be something outside of ourselves that has put that law in place. That would only make sense. But what is it? And who is it? That's the question that Lewis is trying to answer. So as a society, we are constantly striving to make progress. However, we also admit that we live in a messed up world. We've admitted earlier that none of us are perfect and none of us keep this moral law that we have come to discover. Therefore, progress means not pushing forward, but turning back to the right road. Lewis talks about in his chapter, We Have Cause to Be Uneasy. All this talk about making progress is great, but if you're on the wrong track, Lewis says that progress is turning around, going back, and finding the right road. And that's what we're trying to do here. Lewis notes that some people will assume his arguments so far supports the Christian God, and that may be the case, but we haven't yet made an argument explicitly for Christianity. We've only established two things. We've established that there's a moral law, and we've established that someone outside the universe must have established it. That's all we've said. We have only two clues for this person's existence. We have the fact that the universe is here, and it exists, and it functions, and it seems to function a certain way. It seems to be designed a certain way. And then we have that message inside of ourselves that we've called morality. We have this idea of right and wrong. And this causes mankind two problems. We know we break the law, but we hope that whatever this being is will make an exception for us. We hope that maybe we can just get by. And then secondly, if the Creator is ultimately good, we're making ourselves enemies to it every day by our breaking of the moral law. So we've got this dichotomy now that if there's right and wrong, and if there's something outside the universe that has given us right and wrong, and we know we don't keep this law of right and wrong perfectly, we hope that he'll let us by, but we believe that if he's ultimately good, that he can't do that, because then he wouldn't be ultimately good, even though we want him to be. That's the pickle that we find ourselves in as humans. So Lewis will argue that Christianity makes the most sense of this predicament. We call people to repent and seek forgiveness, so that takes care of us not keeping the law perfectly. This is foolish if people don't understand that they've done things that require forgiveness. This is why we haven't made an explicit Christian case yet. It wouldn't make sense to somebody who doesn't have this understanding that they need to be fixed, so to speak. It only makes sense if we believe that there's a law that we have broken and there's a lawgiver that we have wronged. It is only after this realization that Christianity can speak. So now that we've established this, Lewis now thinks that we can start to discuss more specifically why Christianity provides an answer to what we've read in these first 5 chapters. So just to recap, we believe that there's right and wrong. We believe that we as people don't keep this law perfectly. And we believe that because of that, we are at odds with whatever Creator has given us this law. And we have the problem of we hope we can get by somehow, but we know that if he's ultimately good, that we can't get by not being perfect. So how do we fix this problem? Who is this God? And if he's good, has he made a way for a non-perfect creature to get back into his good graces? So keep reading, and I think we'll find the answer. I'll see you guys next week.